Fantastic. So, as the introduction is was said, my name is Andy Pace, and my company is GDC Building for Health. You know, I got to say, first off, I've been following this conference for years, and I remember several years ago having a discussion, I think, with Stephen about this, and I always thought that one day maybe I'd be asked to make a presentation here, and here I am, and I couldn't be happier. I'd like to thank Stephen, the entire staff at Real Truth About Health. It's just a fantastic conference. It's an amazing feat to get all of these experts together, and of course, to have all of you watching and listening and participating. It's just absolutely phenomenal. So today I'm going to talk about healthy building, green building, and I'm going to bring up my PowerPoint that I put together for you. I typically don't do PowerPoints because I'm working with clients all over the world, and everybody has a little bit different, um, way to look at what a healthy home is. And so let me just hit
And your
play
place
here.
hit play.
Yep, there we go. There we go. All right, thank you. And so I'm going to talk about, is your home making you homesick? Pretty self-explanatory, but we'll talk about the history of not only my business and how I got into it, but the history of where the energy efficiency, green building, healthy building movement kind of started and where it is now. We'll talk about the rise of the word green, which, just a couple of decades ago was just a simple color. We'll discuss the problems within our homes. And then specifically, I want to talk about some things that have really made a huge impact on the way we purchase materials. One is greenwashing, and we'll talk about that in detail. And the other was the way we counteracted greenwashing is creating our own building product rating system called Degree of Green. We will focus on the healthy home trends that are occurring right now, and of course, have solutions for making your home a healthier space. Now, I really want to make this informative, but I want to leave enough time for questions and answers at the end because I deal with, in my career, I've dealt with over 30,000 individuals who have chemical sensitivities, allergies, asthma, or just trying to live in a healthier home. And I've learned from every one of them something about the home environment, and I've been able to retain a lot of that information and share it for people. And so I'm really hoping that we can get some good questions at the end. Whoops. All right, so I grew up in a family business that was started back in the 1930s. It's actually a company that is a manufacturer's representative of commercial construction materials. And so I grew up in the 70s and the 80s. And I remember when I was in grade school, sitting around the dinner table, and you would think that most families sitting around a dinner table would talk about things like, what happened today at school and how is this year's sporting activity going. But no, I listened to my mom and dad talking about architects and contractors and job sites. And I have to be honest with you, it thrilled me hearing about this. It's something I've always wanted to do. And so I went through high school, went to college, got out of school, and decided that I was going to work for the family business. This was in 1989. One of the first things that I did in my young career was I started pioneering a new product line of water-based epoxy and water-based polyurethane coatings for industrial building applications, parking structures, airplane hangars, print shops, anywhere they needed really, really tough chemical resistance and abrasion resistance. And I was working on a project in 1992. It was a below grade parking structure for a job in Milwaukee. And I went down to the job site to sort of watch and assist the contractors who are putting on the coatings and be there to answer any questions they may have. And so I made sure, first of all, that they taped up all of the air vents, They cordoned off all the hallways or walkways so that none of any of the chemical fumes would actually get out of the space. At least I thought that's what we did. Um, I remember after the primer coat was applied to the entire surface, we started getting phone calls in the job trailer from people who lived in the condominiums above, complaining about the odors from the chemicals that were being used. Now, again, this is 1992, and we thought it's a water-based product. It can't be bad. I mean, look at all the solvent that we don't have to use. We've come to find out that a product that's called water-based, even still to this day, just means that only 50% of the liquid component is water, and the rest of it can be all sorts of solvents that you've never heard of. So we're working on this project. People are complaining about the odors of above, in condos of above. One of the complaints we get is from a sitting United States senator who happens to have his Milwaukee business office there, and obviously complaining about being driven out of his condo. And then what happened, it completely threw us all for a loop and completely changed the direction of our company from here on in. 3 of our own workers were rushed to the hospital because of inhalation complications. They couldn't breathe. They literally had the oxygen sucked out of the room during the curing process of this primer coat, and they couldn't breathe. And we didn't know what was happening at the time. We just thought inhalation complications, let's get them out, ambulance over to the hospital. And that's what it was. They didn't have enough oxygen. And so I was still young in the industry, 3 years in, and I thought I wasn't going to embarrass myself, embarrass my family business, ruin the reputation that we built over the last 60 years, and sell these coatings that were potentially harmful to people. And so I went on a quest around the country, talking with every expert that I knew on how to finish up this project with materials that were healthier. And I found a very, very small company in California called American Formulating and Manufacturing, otherwise known as AFM. And I'll tell you, that just opened up our eyes. AFM was a company that was making paints and coatings and some specialty sealers for people who had these things called multiple chemical sensitivity or environmental illness or sick building syndrome, things I've never heard of before. Now, again, I was only a few years into my career, but I knew enough about construction from living within this in my family that you think I would have heard these terms before, and it was completely new to me. So in 1993, we opened up a store to sell these healthy materials. And at the time, 95% of our customers were people with extreme chemical sensitivities. And about 5% of those customers, or our customers, were what I would call environmentally aware. So why did we get into this mess that we are in now, and the mess that I saw back in 1992? Well, where it really all starts is the oil embargo in 1973. That's the energy crisis in the 70s that drove all building owners, even contractors and architects, to design spaces that utilize less outside energy, to design homes that were more energy efficient. You know, in commercial spaces, they would reduce the amount of fresh air intake just for the sake of reducing the cost of either heating or cooling that fresh air, but to the detriment of anybody living or working inside that building. And so that's where the term sick building syndrome actually came from, was from the fact that these buildings didn't have enough fresh air to counteract everything else that was going on in that space. Also, throughout that time, we had this huge influx of new manufactured plastic building materials, very cheaply made, fast-built products and projects. You know, you have to remember from the 70s and the late 70s, early 80s, the interest rates on residential projects were upwards of 20% for a loan. And so the only way that builders could get families into new homes was to cheapen up the cost of actually building the home so they could afford the payment. And so they used a lot of manufactured products, a lot of plastics, a lot of things that were bound together utilizing very inexpensive materials like urea formaldehyde, which we now know is a carcinogen, but at the time and still to this day is found in countless building materials that we encounter on a daily basis. There was also this trend towards energy efficiency, and we'll get to that in a little bit. The trend towards energy efficiency really focused on, again, outdoor environment, saving energy costs, but really forgot about the human occupant. I would call this the unintended consequence of trying to do the right thing. I believe that, again, in the late 70s, when it was, I don't know if anybody remembers the government made up this story about how we're running out of landfill space. And it was completely made up. It was actually just designed to sort of get the country to come together in the malaise of this recession that we're in and get everybody to sort of move towards a better goal. So they made up a story about we're running out of landfill space. And that's really what started the entire green movement at that point. Reduce, reuse, recycle. You know, I just had a conversation today, as a matter of fact, with a builder who got his start in the early 70s. And he brings up to me in the conversation, boy, I remember that 1973 oil embargo. And that's what completely changed the way we looked at buildings. And he was exactly right. So one of the things that I deal with on a daily basis is working with people who have extreme chemical sensitivity. And I want to spend some time talking about chemical sensitivity because it really is the crux of what we do and how we help people moving forward. With chemical sensitivity, first off, you have to find out how did somebody become chemically sensitive. And these are really the ways that it happens. Massive exposure to some natural or unnatural substance, life-altering medical event, low-level exposure over a long period of time, or another underlying medical condition. And I'll dig into that in a bit. So massive exposure to an event. 1976, the American Legion's having their annual conference in Philadelphia, and several hundred people get these really crazy flu-like symptoms from an unknown source. Out of that, over 30 people ended up dying. And that's when we found out about Legionnaire's disease, or Legionella, a bacterial infection or bacterial poison that was gotten into people through drinking water and in the HVAC systems. So that would be a massive exposure. Somebody would walk through a building that just had the corners of the room sprayed with pesticides for ants or roaches, could actually trigger a chemical sensitivity. Mold exposure, we'll talk about that in a bit. One thing I always like to bring up when we talk about massive exposure to chemicals is a very embarrassing situation that happened with the EPA themselves in their own building in downtown DC. In 1987, they were doing some remodeling in the building, and they had about 27,000 square feet of carpet replaced during this remodeling project. Now, keep in mind, there was about 700 people working in the space at the time. After this carpet was installed, they had about a quarter of the workforce actually went home sick because of exposure to this, what they would call toxic carpet. And they eventually figured out what the ingredient was in the carpet, and they were able to rip it out and replace it. But to this day, there are still almost 24 people on permanent disability because of that event. Life-altering medical events, childbirth, major surgery, a car accident, something that will change the body chemistry and the body electricity. That can actually cause chemical sensitivity. And then an underlying medical condition. This is probably, I would say, the most research that's being done on chemical sensitivity is actually because of research being done on underlying medical conditions. Most specifically, Lyme's disease, chronic inflammation response, and mast cell activation syndrome. So, like I said, I started my company in 1993, and by the late 90s to early 2000s, the construction industry was experiencing this massive push towards green. In 1993, green was simply a color. In 1995, 96, the United States Green Building Council was formed. By the end of the 90s, they actually created what's called the Leadership in Environmental Energy Efficient Design, the LEED program. And so they're pushing towards green, as it became known as a everyday building method and checklist. But during that time, they also developed, or they meaning the manufacturers of all the materials being used, developed ways to market their products to get people more interested in buying them. And so they would manipulate the public by using terms that we, and many people called greenwashing. It's kind of like whitewashing something to make it look better than it is. Greenwashing is essentially the same thing. It's describing a product to be more eco-friendly or healthy or what have you, by using terms and phrases and methods to make you think that they're better than they actually are. So I'll give you some of the examples that I am sure you can relate to on your daily basis. So the first one is do as I say. I like to refer to this one as the Al Gore syndrome. We'll fly around the world in our private jets, burning thousands of gallons of jet fuel and releasing tons of carbon into the air to preach about how we need to save energy and reduce carbon. It's probably the number one form of greenwashing we have today, still to this day. Biodegradable. This one's used quite often, especially by manufacturers of things like cleaning materials and other household goods. Biodegradable just assumes that, well, you throw it into a landfill and eventually it just turns back into soil. Styrofoam cups will biodegrade. It takes about 400 to 500,000 years, but they will biodegrade. So can you call a styrofoam cup biodegradable? A lot of manufacturers were throwing this tag on things that they would just say it's biodegradable, but wouldn't give you a time frame. Internally biased decisions. This one is used quite often in the industry to this day. This would be a manufacturer coming up with their own marketing term or their own quasi-independent lab and put a stamp on the side of the can to say it's been certified. I remember a paint company did this years ago. They put a little leaf in a term called Green Sure, and they said this product has been certified by Green Sure to be green, whatever that meant. This is their way to just get you to buy their product. But people fell for it, still falling for it to this day. Locally made. I'm sure you've heard of companies that are making materials or what have you. They'll say that their products are locally made by, are handcrafted locally, probably by materials or raw materials that came from China. So you have to be careful about something that's being called, saying locally made, depends on where the product is actually made from or where the ingredients come from. Natural, I skipped that one. I'll go back to this one. Natural is one that we see quite often. And you would think that marketing a product as being all natural, and I'm sure many people listening today are people who are involved in nutrition and healthcare, especially from the nutritional standpoint. You see this every single day and you hear this. It's natural, it's got to be safe. Okay, so asbestos is natural, lead is natural, arsenic is natural. I could go on and on and on about what natural is, okay? And so just because something is natural does not mean it's actually safe or it's green by any attribute. Single attributes, this is something where a manufacturer has a product that might be toxic to humans, made in across the world. There's really no environmental benefit, but maybe it's recyclable. So the manufacturer puts all over the literature, this product is recyclable, and therefore alluding to the fact that it's a green building material. Be careful with that one. All right, some examples of companies that actually have done this. There's been many good examples to share, but I'll talk about these because they're very pertinent. First of all, clothing manufacturer years ago came up with a clothing line, and every tag on their clothes said that they derived a percentage of their fabrics from organic sources. Now, in the industry, if you look at the fabrics industry globally, there's somewhere about 33% recycled content or organic content just by default. There's a lot of cotton producers that don't use a lot of chemical. They could be actually marketed as organic, but they don't because they don't want to pay for the marketing costs. But yet their products still are organic. Home improvements. Now, we saw this at the big building material box stores. Years ago, they came up with this signage that they would pick and choose materials around their store, and they put this eco option tag on it. And again, getting you to think, well, it's eco-friendly, maybe I should buy it from my house. And well, it turns out that they would put a eco options tag on a bag of fiberglass insulation. And at the time that they did this, fiberglass insulation still contained urea formaldehyde, but they did it because it was an environmentally friendly thing for you to do to insulate your home. That was the argument, I guess, that they had. You know, and the problem is, even if it was formaldehyde-free insulation, let's say they had one of those at the time, it wasn't an option to insulate our homes. It's never really been an option, especially in the last 30 years. You know, it's building code in most parts of the country. So again, they were just using this tag to play upon your emotions to get you to buy the product. I also remember they put an eco options tag on a battery powered chainsaw. And I thought that was funny because, you know, you're not burning gasoline and to run the chainsaw, you're using battery power, which is charged by a battery you plug into the wall, and that energy is made by burning coal. So it really didn't make any sense. And they're still cutting down trees with it. So a manufacturer of clothing, actually, I remember years ago, Patagonia, they would win environmental award year after year because they were utilizing what's called eco fleece to make their jackets and their hats and gloves. And again, people bought it and just bought tons of their clothing. Well, it turns out that eco fleece was actually made from plastic water and soda bottles, which, you know, and it's, you know, on the surface, you'd think this is great. They're taking all this plastic out of the landfill. We're now using it for something that can be helpful for people and again, help the environment. What they didn't really realize, or they didn't care to realize, is the chemist that invented PET plastic back in the 30s, in his original report said that this product should never come in contact with human skin because it can enter in the bloodstream, create what are called trihalomethanes, and essentially eat the body from the inside out. But yet we're giving these companies awards for making products that we're now surrounding ourselves with on a daily basis, and our skin, our largest organ, is absorbing every single day. There was a company that made organic food, they made a food line called Organic Choice, but then, you know, nothing in it was actually organic. That was taken off the market in about 6 months. In the building industry, one of the two biggest forms of greenwashing that I can talk about is bamboo flooring and compact fluorescent lights. Now, bamboo flooring started in this country. We started importing into the US back in the mid 90s, and it became quite quickly the darling of the environmental movement because bamboo, it's a grass, it grows really fast. You know, a bamboo shoot can grow to harvest size in about 5 years, where it takes an oak tree 60 years. So if you look at it again on the surface, fast growing, you can make flooring and cabinetry and all this stuff out of it. It was great. But it all is grown and harvested in China. Of the 1,400 species around the world of bamboo, the only species that we can use comes from China. And what happened was farmers and large industrial companies in China became keenly aware that the United States was enamored with bamboo. So they bought up thousands of acres of indigenous tree land, and they clear cut it and they planted bamboo because the US thought bamboo was eco-friendly. That's one of the biggest forms of greenwashing in our industry. Compact fluorescent light bulbs. We all remember those curly Q bulbs from the early 2010s, late 2000s, or late 2000s. These bulbs were brought out to replace incandescent lights. And sure, they're energy efficient. If you turn it on and leave it on for 10 years straight, it'll be great. Turning it on and off every single day, you'll burn out the ballast that's inside of the bulb. So when the bulb actually stops working, most people will just chuck them into the garbage. And that's illegal because you have to recycle them at a recycling center, because each bulb contains a mini circuit board that's soldered with lead solder, and it contains mercury. And what was happening was they were actually detecting the mercury and lead coming from the waste facilities when they would send this into the landfill. And so it really was taking the opposite effect with people. So in response to this, with all this new marketing ads that environmental and social that manufacturers were coming up with, and greenwashing and so forth, I had to come up with a way that I could educate my staff, educate my clients on what green really means, because that term gets thrown around still to this day, and nobody really entirely understands what the definition is. So why did I invent it? Well, I invented it because every single day customers would call up and ask questions like, what's more green, bamboo flooring or cork flooring, or natural wool carpeting or recycled nylon carpeting? And actually, those are two very good questions. And I'd have to answer the customer and say, well, first off, cork flooring comes from cork that's harvested in Portugal, where 95% of the cork comes from. It's actually bark that comes off the cork oak tree that sloughs off naturally every 10 to 15 years. So farmers figured out a way hundreds of years ago to harvest it and allow it to regrow. It's one of the only trees that has that the bark will regenerate on its own. And so that's a very sustainable building material, but it does come from halfway around the world. Bamboo, as I talked about before, comes from China, and everything that comes from it. So you have to decide, though, what's more important for you. The attributes of bamboo, the attributes of cork. Carpeting, looking at natural wool carpeting that's not treated with any pesticides, chemical dyes, or other additives. You can actually take that at the end of its lifespan, which is about 70 to 80 years, and grind it up and put it into a farm field. And it actually helps to aerate the soil. It's good for the soil. But it's all virgin material, right? It's not necessarily anything that's recycled. Then you get carpet made from 100% recycled nylon carpeting. So it's used again, it's kept out of the landfill. But the environmental cost of recycling nylon, there's a lot of chemical usage, there's a lot of exhaust, there's a lot of carbon footprint involved in remaking one version of carpet into another. But the argument was, what's more green? And it comes down to personal preference. We'll talk about that in a bit. So what is it? What is the degree of green system? Well, degree of green system is a rating and a review system that I created that incorporates the 27 different reasons why a product or a service can be called green. And I boiled it down into the three main categories: human health, environmental health, and sustainability. So we use it by asking every single client that walks through our doors or calls us over the phone, what is their version of green? What are they looking for? It's not a cookie cutter approach. And this is where the industry went wrong years ago. They invented this term green and they lumped everything into the same boat. So we find out what the customer's personal degree of green is, and then we guide them to the correlating products. Manufacturers are still using the degree of green themselves to help customers find the right product. So let's talk about the different customers and the different attributes. So the first attribute of the degree of green is human health. Obviously, it's people suffering from chemical sensitivities, allergies, asthma, families with autistic children. The key here is going to be low to no toxins. So what happens is I get a customer that walks into the showroom that says, we're building a house, but it's got to be the safest home possible. We have either, a 7-year-old at home with autism can't be around chemicals at off gases. It's been known for years now that autistic children will their symptoms get heightened when exposed to chemical exposure. So again, they're building a home or trying to build a home completely made from low to non-toxic materials. Next customer walks into the showroom and says, and this actually happened to me, so this is what I used to create this. She says, I'm 55 years old. I've been a burden to the earth for 55 years. How can I take a home and remodel it utilizing recycled, repurposed, renewed materials? I don't want anything made for my home that's virgin rubber, virgin plastics, cutting down trees, and so forth. I want to buy my materials from the Habitat Restore and use hand-me-downs from friends. So for the sustainability aspect of the degree of green, it's all about that. It's about deconstructing and rebuilding. If there's a home being taken down nearby, trying to secure as many of those raw materials that you can use for your own home. Recycled materials like cabinetry that's made from glass and concrete. Countertops made from glass and concrete. Cabinetry that you maybe buy from the Habitat Restore because somebody else decided to upgrade their house, and you know what? It works perfect for you, so you'll take them. There's drywall made from paper cups. There's a whole variety of materials, interior design materials made from recycled and repurposed materials. And then the whole aspect of bio-based products like plant oil-based paints and coatings. And then flooring materials like natural linoleum and cork. We'll talk about both of those in a bit. Third customer walks into the showroom and says, I want to build a house with the lowest carbon footprint because we're trying to be as eco-friendly as possible because of global climate issues. So we're looking at energy efficiency, reduced carbon footprint. This is really the term where the term green came from, was environment. And so most builders, architects, anybody in the industry, when they think of green, they're really thinking of this environmental health aspect of the degree of green. So just 1/3 of the entire program. So these are homes that are built to passive house standards, which is beyond Energy Star, beyond LEED. These are homes that you could literally heat with a couple of hair dryers in the room because they're so energy efficient. Now, out of all of these customers that I've just talked about, which one is right? Which one's wrong? It's impossible for me to say. I think it's impossible for the industry to say which one of these customers are really correct. But for me, I really focused and where I set all my sights on was the human health aspect of construction, because I determined years ago that, actually one of the terms I use in my business is, what good is saving the environment if we're still poisoning all the occupants? And so I use that on a daily basis, kind of a mantra. And we really want to make sure that the home is the healthiest space that you walk into on a daily basis. Matter of fact, I think that a healthy home is also by definition environmentally friendly. So what is a VOC and why do we care? And so this is something we talked about years ago. As a matter of fact, for many years, this is the only metric being used to determine indoor air quality scores. And so, yes, it's true. Some VOCs are dangerous or unhealthy to humans, but some aren't. And so let me describe exactly what a VOC is. A VOC is what's called a volatile organic compound. A volatile organic compound, this is the EPA definition. A volatile organic compound is any carbon-based molecule that is readily vaporized or excited at room temperature that could release from the surface, rise to the atmosphere, react with nitrogen and UV, and create smog. That's it. That's why the EPA regulates VOCs. Remember, the EPA is the Environmental Protection Agency. They're not the Human Protection Agency. In my opinion, they could care less about the occupants of the environment that are human. And so they regulate the volatile organic compound releases from paints and coatings and flooring and just about every building material. But yet it's used as, I think, the most prolific form of greenwashing there is. People are literally making life or death decisions on what they buy for their homes simply by looking at whether or not the product contains a VOC or not. And that's highly, highly dangerous. So I said before that some are hazardous to humans directly. Yes, there are a lot of VOCs that are hazardous. Toluene, xylene, these are these things that we know of to be extremely odoriferous and dangerous solvents. And so good for the industry, and I'm glad for this. Most of that junk has been taken out of our building materials. There's no reason for that stuff to be in there. But the problem was when the EPA started regulating VOCs, they regulated them all with the same broad brush. And I'll take specifically the paint industry because that's what I know probably the best. So in the paint industry, years ago, manufacturers in latex paints, water-based paints, manufacturers would use an ingredient called ethylene glycol. Ethylene glycol was an additive to make paint easy to apply. It would make it roll on smooth. It would make it level out nice and smooth. It would help you so that as you're rolling the paint on, you wouldn't get a dry edge and a lap line. So it helped to maintain that wet edge. Ethylene glycol also happens to be antifreeze for your car. Obviously a very, very dangerous chemical. And the EPA said, got to get it out of there. And not because of any human health concern, of course, because it'll contribute to outdoor air pollution. So there were other manufacturers like AFM, Safecoat, the brand that I worked with starting years ago, that used a cousin chemical called propylene glycol. And you probably see propylene glycol every day in supplements. It's found in toothpaste and mouthwash and vanilla extract and so forth. Propylene glycol is also a VOC, but it's also, especially in used in paints, completely harmless to humans in paints, unless somebody's drinking it, which is, of course, we wouldn't recommend. But it didn't have the same toxicological effect in a fume or a vapor or on your skin the way that ethylene did. So the EPA said, you got to get it all out of there. So manufacturers then started adding in other things to take its place. And this is why the VOC regulations are so darn dangerous. When manufacturers were forced to take away all of those VOCs that were regulated by the EPA said, well, if you're doing that, we'll allow you to use this list of 37 unregulated VOCs, right? So there's a few hundred VOCs that they have to take out, and there's 37 that they don't have to, they can actually add back in, including acetone, butyl acetate, and ammonia, among the others. But those three ingredients, although we know them to be very dangerous for humans in direct contact, they don't actually rise to the atmosphere and react with nitrogen and UV to create smog. And so the paint lobby really worked hard on this to get the government to allow these ingredients and not have to disclose them on these safety data sheets. All right. So that's why you get people that'll use a zero VOC paint and still complain about the odors and get in a headache. Over the years, there have been dozens of manufacturers either enjoyed in class action lawsuits or actually fined by the FTC for duping the public on what the VOC content truly is. So let's say, for instance, a manufacturer uses acetone in their paint, and that's not a VOC. All right. On the flip side, every morning you wake up and you go into the kitchen, you peel an orange for breakfast. When you peel that orange, you're releasing 750 grams per liter of VOCs. Doesn't mean it's dangerous. So that just shows that VOCs aren't always dangerous for humans in direct contact. And the ingredients that are found in the products we use can be extremely dangerous or toxic, but not even be a VOC. And that's how we end up using these products and still running into problems. All right, so the trends within the building industry, um, between 2009 and 2012, the U.S. experienced what was called the Great Recession. If you all remember that, is this massive housing market crash. And I remember this sitting at my desk and looking at numbers of sales and so forth and stats. I thought something's going on, something's not right. And by the end of 2009, it was deemed that we're in a recession. Well, what happened was all the progress we made in the green industry in the last 10 years literally vanished overnight, or at least that's what it seemed like, because no one would invest into replacing kitchen cabinets or replacing their countertops in a home that was literally losing value every single day because of this recession. So all the money in construction went out. New construction, remodeling, there was nothing until about 2012, 2013. Interesting thing happened though. When people came back to the market in 2012, 2013, those same people who would come into our showroom looking for those recycled glass and concrete countertops or looking for the bamboo or cork floors would come back to us and say, you know what, we want to remodel our living room now, but can you tell me what's the benefit that I'll get out of this? And I kind of question that, what do you mean benefit? Isn't this just about the environment? And they say, no, we want to know if we're buying like this natural wool carpet, and I know it's a little more expensive than traditional synthetic carpet. Is there any health benefit to this? What is my family going to get besides just having to pay more for it? And I realized pretty quickly that when that market came back, the customer base came back more knowledgeable, and they weren't just buying green for the sake of buying green so they can tell their friends and their family and their neighbors that, hey, we're doing something for their environment. No, they were buying green because they wanted something that was actually better for them, better for their bottom line, but mainly better for them all around. Then comes the pandemic, and the industry shuts down for about a month. We came back pretty quickly because we were considered one of those essential companies, which is kind of a ridiculous statement. Anyway, the construction industry absolutely boomed. 2020, 2021, 2022, all record years in residential construction. Why? Because people were sitting around the home. You had at the kitchen table, you had your kids over here doing homework or learning remotely. You had you and your spouse were sitting over there, and you were working from home. And in between Zoom calls and Zoom meetings, you look around the house and go, well, as long as I'm here, I should probably paint this room because it looks like it used good painting. Or maybe we should redo the floors, or let's remodel. Heck, let's just, refinish the cabinets. And so people were coming out of the woodwork to buy materials. I mean, if you all remember, Home Depots and Lowe's of the world ran out of lumber, ran out of building materials because people were coming in record numbers to buy materials. But people also realized at that time, well, if I'm going to be in this home while this work is being done, started realizing that their home needed to be their sanctuary. The home needed to be the healthiest space that they were in and day out. So, I think that has really caused this massive wave, this paradigm shift in the construction business now to the trend of healthy home. And this is where I started doing a lot of my consulting. I started a podcast in 2018, mainly just to get all this information in my head out to people. I also wanted to be able to sleep at night, so I had to get this information out. And doing the podcast, I found that people really wanted to learn more. And then through COVID, I was stuck in my office here, and we were still shipping materials, but the amount of people calling to get information, to get assistance with remodeling or just fixing up the home was staggering. So I started my consulting business really in earnest then. And I learned from all those customers, what works for each client and what questions I need to ask in order to get them to their goal of building a healthy home. Like I said before, I've worked with over 30,000 people in my career. I've learned so much from each and every one of them, and I'd be able to retain that information so I could share it to the next person that calls. All right, now here's where we get into some of the nuts and bolts, literally, of healthy home discussion. And thank you for allowing me to sort of set the table these last the first part of the talk, because I think really in order to understand how to make your home healthy or what even a healthy home is, you have to understand why we got into this mess. So again, thank you for listening to that. So the problematic areas in the home, 90% of the toxicity issues that come from the building materials in a new home or even in a remodeled home will come from the things you see and touch on a daily basis. The biggest area would be flooring. It's the largest expanse in your home, right? And it's also the thickest amount of material. So you kind of do the math, and that's the largest possible problem in your home for any type of chemical release. The second will be your wall finishes, paint, plaster, wall coverings, etc. Third, cabinetry and woodwork. And then fourth would be your own personal furnishings, such as window treatments, furniture, area rugs, and the sort. So again, why is flooring number one? Well, first of all, because people still insist on using a lot of carpet. And I'll be honest, this is the number one thing that I'll talk about with any new client is if you're living in a home that has carpet, I would rather have you rip it out, get it out of the house, live on the subfloors until you can afford to put in new flooring. Because carpeting, most of it that's on the market today, sans one or two manufacturers, carpeting will be the most toxic thing you have in your house. And I know this not only from my own personal experience, but actually when I was just growing up in this business and in the mid to late 90s, I read a study that was done by Dr. Rosalind Anderson, Anderson Labs, and she created a test back in the late 80s, I believe, that tested the toxicity of the air that's created from the emissions from carpeting. And so she would take a small 3-inch by 3-inch cut of carpet and put it into a large tank, cover it up, make it look like a mini house. And then she'd have one panel of glass on one side, and she just put a light on and kind of mimic what happens when you have light coming into a space and heating up the carpet or exciting the chemicals in carpet. And then she'd subject that air to laboratory mice. And she found that the lab mice would actually experience a whole host of neurological symptoms, dizziness, so forth, but all the way up to death from being exposed to the air created from carpeting that's off-gassing. Now, of course, everybody says, well, this, of course, you're talking about new carpet, right? Right off the roll, just installed, or before it's installed, she was testing. No, she actually tested carpeting that was up to 21 years old. That somebody should have people sending her carpet swatches, please test mine. And she was getting these results from that carpet. and I've actually tested myself carpeting that's over 30 years old in people's homes that off gases absolutely toxic levels of formaldehyde. I try to strive for formaldehyde levels of 20 parts per billion or lower when it comes to the materials in a home. In the air, I try to get less than 10 parts per billion or even less than 5. But when I'm testing 31-year-old carpeting that has 450 to 500 parts per billion of formaldehyde off gassing, and that's off gassing in people's homes, you know how bad that stuff is. So I always recommend, if you have to use carpeting, there's a couple of brands out there. One is Earthweave out of Georgia that makes an absolutely wonderful collection of carpeting out of nothing but undyed wool. It's not treated with any pesticides, any chemical dyes, any flame retardants. The backing is made from hemp, jute, cotton, and natural latex right from the rubber tree. No synthetics used whatsoever. Excellent product line. Nature's Carpet up in Canada has also a very, very good line of what they call their dark green series of chemical-free or synthetic chemical-free carpets. And I've used these for years now with some of my most chemically sensitive clients with wonderful success. Now, you have to remember that carpeting can still be a problem with dust and dust mites. With wool carpet, it can always be a problem with moths. You have to keep it clean and keep it dry. And you also have to remember that it can be a sponge for other things that are off-gassing in the house. And as those chemicals that are releasing from surface can actually fall into the carpet and get embedded there. So you have to keep that carpet really clean. I also like to recommend hard materials like wood, a natural wood, and tile. Years ago, wood was supplied as a 3/4 inch tongue and groove raw that was nailed in and then sanded and sealed in the field. And that's still good today, provided that you're using non-toxic stains and sealers, products that Safecoat makes. But quite honestly, over the years, I've changed my recommendations to what I would call factory finished woods, either factory finished solid woods, factory finished engineered woods. An engineered wood is simply a wood that has a ply of material. Kind of hard to see there, but it's basically layers of hardwoods held together, in this case using formaldehyde-free adhesives. It's stained and finished at the factory, and all you have to do is install it. So there's no dealing with all the dust and all the curing process. So you can literally walk on it while it's being installed. And so I think, to maintain a healthier home, it's a much better choice. Porcelain tile is a great choice. And I say porcelain tile because porcelain is a higher grade of a ceramic tile. It's a tile that is it's going to be harder, more dense, far less susceptible to moisture absorption through. And therefore, it's better for alleviating any potential mold problems in the future. Downside with porcelain, of course, that it's very hard and very cold. But for people who have extreme chemical sensitivities, who even react to the smell of natural woods, because again, as I said before, just because it's natural doesn't mean it's safe for everybody. Porcelain tile is the choice because it has no smell. We have to be concerned about the grouts and the thin set mortars and the waterproofer backings and so forth that are used to assemble everything. But of course, those are things that we choose based upon client preference and what their own individual sensitivities are. Natural linoleum is something that has really made a comeback over the years. But I think when people hear the term linoleum, they're really referring to vinyl flooring, sheet vinyl flooring. And that's what most people have in a laundry room or even in a kitchen or a bathroom. 100% man-made material that releases endocrine disruptors and so forth. We want to avoid that. Linoleum, the term linoleum is actually a compound word meaning jute in linseed oil. Linoleum was first developed in the Netherlands back in the mid to late 1800s. And it's actually still made there today in the same manufacturing plants using the same ingredients. Linseed oil pine resin, pigments, wood flour, cork flour, spread onto a jute backing. Linoleum is what maybe your parents or your grandparents had in their home. Now, back then, linoleum was, you had to hand wax it. The adhesives weren't very good, so you'd literally have to peel it up or pick it up to sweep underneath it and put it back down again. But today, linoleum has better factory finishes. Linoleum has better adhesives. Linoleum installed in a residential home today will last as long as the house. The house will literally fall down around it. I mean, in a commercial space, it'll last 50 years. So in a residential space, it's fantastic. Plus, because it contains linseed oil, natural linseed oil, it is naturally antibacterial and anti-static. So they don't have to add in any microban or anything like that to give it antibacterial properties. It's natural. Cork flooring is another one that I like to recommend on a regular basis because it's very phthalates into the air. So there's no concern there. And they texturize it and print it to look like wood. It's absolutely gorgeous, beautiful, beautiful product. I think that this is probably one of the best innovations in the cork industry that I've seen in my 30 years. Wall finishes. So I think most people are interested in painting their walls. And so the go-to right now is either a latex paint or a mineral paint. Let's first talk about latex paint. Latex paint does not mean latex rubber. Latex is actually a term that was coined back in the 50s by one of the paint companies. And latex is actually just it's plural for the word lattice. And lattice means a water-based acrylic emulsion. So even though latex paint does not contain latex rubber, all latex paints are made from acrylics. All latex paints are literally liquid plastics. And we're putting this on our walls all over our homes. Now, there are better ways to do it. Obviously, we have companies that are making zero VOC paints. That's good for the environment, doesn't really help us. You have companies like Safecoat, AFM Safecoat, making paints that are not only zero VOC, but free of those toxic ingredients that are not VOCs and free of any hazardous air pollutants. So this would be what I would call a good compromise. It's a really good premium grade product that still looks like and feels like, acts like what we've known now for all these years to be a latex paint. And there's mineral paint. Mineral paint has been around for hundreds of years. Mineral paint is made from either potassium silicates. Some paint is made with lime as the main ingredient. And it's made without using any synthetics whatsoever. And when a mineral paint gets applied to a surface, it's actually breathable. It becomes part of the surface. It doesn't allow moisture to get locked in a space. So this is really important if you're building a home, trying to make it as mold resistant as possible. Mineral paint will allow moisture in the home to sort of migrate into the walls and then back out. Instead of migrating in and getting stuck, or moisture that's in the wall itself not being able to get out and it starts to turn into mold, a mineral paint is breathable. It allows for that breathability. Plus, it has just an absolutely beautiful appearance to it. Matter of fact, you can even talk about the properties that mineral paints have into absorbing and neutralizing VOCs from other materials that are off-gassing. Plaster, now there's a few different types of plaster. Probably what we see most here in the US is just a gypsum-based plaster. And That's mainly used as a decorative plaster. Lime plaster is another one. It's used more so in Europe. Venetian plaster is a form of lime plaster that's really, really thin and polished and waxed. And then there's another one called clay plaster. There was a company years ago called American Clay that made it just a wonderful do-it-yourself type plaster out of natural, ground found clays that came from Georgia and Texas and so forth. And it was really fun to work with, looked really nice. I use it in my own house. I use it in our showroom here. Clay plaster is fantastic because it really helps to regulate humidity in the house. It absorbs humidity out of the air and it breathes back in when needed. And then other wall coverings like wallpaper made from chemical-free or toxin-free paints. Farrow and Ball is a company that comes to mind. They make some wonderful paints, but they also make a great line of high-end decorative wallpapers that are completely toxin-free. And I know because I've tested them. Caba, a company out of New Mexico, CABA. Caba, they make wall coverings out of pounded bark. Absolutely beautiful products. And we install them by using non-toxic acrylic glazes. And it looks absolutely beautiful. So cabinetry is my number 3. We've had flooring, we've had wall coverings. Cabinetry is my number 3 releaser of toxins into a home. And you would think it wouldn't even be on the list because it's just such a small area, right? I mean, compared to your walls and compared to your floors, cabinetry makes up a very, very small area of your house. But the thing is that cabinetry is typically made from things like plywoods or particle boards, held together with glues and then finished stains and clear coats and paints. And every single day you wake up in the morning and you grab that cup of coffee or cup for coffee or tea when you open up the door and you get this rush of chemical into the face. And that's the off-gassing from the cabinetry that gets stuck in there until the next time you open the door. So I think that cabinetry is really one of those crucial parts of a home that you have to look at in order to make it a healthier space. I talked about before how cabinets are made. Typically, the boxes are made of a plywood or a medium density fiberboard, particle board that's laminated. And you have to make sure that the materials that are used are either formaldehyde free or are the least amount of formaldehyde available. Something like Green Guard Gold certified or beyond just what's called CARB compliance, the California Air Resource Board. You want to make sure that these are really low emitting cabinets. The doors and the drawer fronts are typically solid wood. Then you have glue that holds it all together in small spaces. Now, I have actually tested cabinetry myself, and I've tested glues. And I found that wood glue, any wood glue that they'll use, will contain a high amount of formaldehyde that will off-gas for 2.5 to 4.5 years. The thing is, though, about cabinetry is when they put the pieces of wood together and they glue that small area, once they squeeze the pieces together and they scrape off and sand off all that excess glue, there's such a small area that's actually exposed. We're talking about, thinner than a human hair, that we really don't find any measurable off-gassing from that adhesive. So I really don't worry about that when I'm dealing with clients who have extreme sensitivities, because it's such a small amount. You'd actually find more formaldehyde outside naturally than you find from that wood glue. Then you have hardware, your hinges, your knobs and pulls, and your drawer slides and all that. It's all made of predominantly metal and then very hard nylons that do not off-gas. So I don't worry about that. But then your finish. And the finish is either a stain and a clear coat or a painted finish, which is very popular now. For the most part, painted finishes will always off-gas less than stains and clear coats. Stain, oil-based stain, which is used predominantly throughout the industry, is one of the biggest releasers of formaldehyde off-gassing in all of woodwork. So when you put a clear coat over the top, it helps to block some of that off-gassing, but it still shines through. And that off-gassing will last anywhere from 2.5 to 4.5 years after reaching a full cure. And so manufacturers are starting to use water-based instead of oil-based. So it limits the amount of solvent. And they're starting to use very, very low VOC water-based clear coats, which is really helping, but doesn't completely block all that chemical off gas. So with those customers who are extremely sensitive, we're having cabinets made by a company like Crystal Cabinets. They're making them unfinished. We're finishing them in the field using Safe Coat products because we know the Safe Coat products will block any potential off gassing there could be from those small areas like the wood glue. Now, with cabinetry, there's a couple of certifications I look for. Their first one is the KCMA certification. The KCMA is their environmental stewardship program. Honestly, folks, this doesn't pertain much to the health of the occupant. It's more towards the overall goal of the cabinet maker in their environmental stewardship. Are they using certified sustainably harvested woods? Do they have a very strong dust collection system, a recycling program within the company? What are they doing to minimize waste? What do they do to minimize pollution? So these are all very good attributes that I look for in a company, just to know that they're a good corporate citizen, that I'd like to work with them. That's the first thing I look for. You can also start to look for what's called Green Guard Gold certification. Used to be called, I think, Green Guard Children in Schools, but now it's called Green Guard Gold. Green Guard Gold certification actually will tell you that they've tested this piece. It's actually found now in furniture. We're seeing more in furniture. Hasn't quite hit the cabinetry market yet, but it will. The Green Guard Gold certification will be testing the finished good and making sure that it has less than 7 parts per billion of formaldehyde off-gassing coming from it. That's an extremely low number. That's definitely something that I look for. I would certainly recommend that to any of my clients because that's almost as low as you can get with a wood, because wood contains some naturally found formaldehyde because it was a once living thing. All right, the fourth and final area inside the home to think about is your personal furnishings, furniture, window treatments, area rugs. And then I want to talk about, I've mentioned before that I test things, and I'm talking to you about the fret system that I use. So with furniture, obviously, it's the same thing we talked about with cabinetry. A lot of the same materials used. You want to look for materials that are Green Guard Gold certified. Companies like even West Elm and Pottery Barn and others are starting to showcase Green Guard Gold certified pieces. Window treatments. You have to remember that light coming through a window is going to carry with it a lot of heat energy, and that will excite the chemicals that are in your window treatments and then expels into the air. We work with a company called Earthshade that makes some absolutely fabulous low chemical, low tox window treatments. Area rugs. So let me tell you a story. And you already know where it goes just by me saying area rugs. But so several years ago, I was called up to Minnesota to work with a family who had moved into a home. And about 6 months after moving in the home, they decided to install brand new engineered hardwood flooring throughout the entire space. This is about 5,000 square feet of hardwood throughout their house, upper level, main level, and lower level. Beautiful hardwood flooring. But within about a week for getting this wood installed, the entire family started complaining about flu-like symptoms, to the point where the mom and one of the daughters actually moved out and stayed in a hotel because they couldn't tolerate being in the space. They called in several indoor air quality scientists, and they all concluded, because they all came in with their handheld meters, they even did air quality tests, sampling tests, said, yep, there's a formaldehyde problem in this house, and it's got to be coming from those hardwood floors. That's the only thing that was done. You got 5,000 square feet of engineered hardwood, and the whole family's getting sick. Well, they were facing about a $55,000-$60,000 investment to rip out these floors and install new floors. And so they wanted to make one more attempt to make sure that this is what the problem was. And I'm not exactly sure how I was called in. I think it was one of the indoor air quality scientists said, that's about the extent that he knows. Why don't you call Andy? And so I went up there and I used this frat system that I have a picture of here. And I tested every room of the house, the floor in every room, just to make sure that maybe it was just the bedrooms, or maybe it was just a bad batch in a couple of cartons that was causing the problem, but tested every room. And after doing my formaldehyde release test, I found that those hardwood floors were completely healthy, didn't emit formaldehyde at all. And everyone in the home was just completely dumbfounded because, what they've been told by 3 other experts, I just, dismissed pretty quickly. So then I started thinking, well, maybe they repainted. So I started testing painted walls. I started testing some furniture, and it dawned on me that every room in the house also had a brand new area rug, whether it was a small, 2x3 area rug behind the, next to the bed, or it was a large area rug in the great room or the living room. Every single room had an area rug. They had something like 15 or 17 new area rugs in this house. So I started testing those, and that's what the culprit was. Rugs were testing over 500 parts per billion of formaldehyde. It's probably coming from the dyes or the pesticides that were used. They were beautiful area rugs, very well made, but they were highly, highly toxic. And so found out what the culprit was. I told them, roll them all up, put them up in the garage, and let me know tomorrow how you're feeling. So I drive my 6.5 hours home, wake up the next morning, get my email, and there's an email saying that, can't believe it, but everybody's feeling better already. Headaches are going away, itchy eyes, watery eyes are going away. And then I talked to them on the phone a few days later, and they said, we can't sense a thing anymore. That was exactly the problem. And so with my tests, I probably, it was probably a $500 or $600 test at the time, saved them about $60,000 worth of ripping out those hardwood floors just because of these darn area rugs. So I use this every day with clients, making sure, be careful on where you get those area rugs. So let me talk about this frat system a bit here, because I want to get in Q&A. The frat system is a formaldehyde release system, or testing system. And you've got the picture there. Here's a little unit right here. And what I can do is take a sample that somebody sends me, or even go into somebody's home with this little disc, these little discs that I would activate with distilled water and attach to a surface. And I attach it to the surface and it sits there for 30 minutes. What's called passive emissivity. It passively absorbs any formaldehyde that's coming from this surface. And in 30 minutes, I take the tab off, I put it into the spectrophotometer, and I read the difference, the color difference in the tab. And that shows me down to an accuracy of 1 part per billion, how much formaldehyde is coming from that surface. And so this test has saved clients, obviously, tens of thousands of dollars. We've averted so many crises over the years. People, not installing something that they're going to install because of what we found through our testing. Oops. All right. Now, I talked about the 90% toxicity it's found from the things you see and touch on a daily basis. Where's that last 10% coming from? Well, it's coming from the things you don't see. Your wall assembly, how your wall's built, windows, attic and crawl space, and the concrete itself. And I'll quickly go through these things because, again, they're not as important from direct human health contact, but they are important because you have one shot at it. So we want to make sure you choose wisely. Your wall assembly, we want to make sure that the wall assembly in constructing a home is made with materials that will resist moisture. And we'll talk about that in a second. Resist moisture, but if moisture does get in, there are ways for it to escape so it doesn't sit there and fester and cause a mold problem. The windows, we want to make sure that the windows are itself not going to off gas. All right. In order of from good to not so good, your best window you'll find is an aluminum frame window. Then you have a fiberglass frame window, then a wood window, and then vinyl windows. Now, you'd think wood windows would be a little bit higher, but all wood used for the construction of windows in North America have to be treated with pesticides. And so in order to keep that from causing any harm with my extremely chemical sensitive clients, we would have to put on special coatings, and there's no way to fully coat a wood frame window once it's installed. And so we just tend to avoid those. Attic and crawl space. You really have to be careful with how you construct, let's say, an attic. You know, up here, I'm in Wisconsin, and here we build our homes with basements. And so all the HVAC equipment is going to be down in the basement. Okay. In areas of the country that build homes concrete slab on grade or have a crawl space, your HVAC systems are sometimes up in the attic. And if that's the case, imagine having all that equipment up there and air flowing through. There's a high probability that you're going to have cracks and crevices and little voids within the sheet metal of the equipment that'll draw in attic air that could also draw in mold spores, which causes, you know, that problem of mold generating within your duct system. And then concrete itself, you know, concrete for the most part is going to be inert. But in the last 10 years, there's been this push to use an ingredient in concrete called fly ash. Fly ash is the sludge that's scraped from the inside of the smokestacks of coal-fired energy plants. And for years, environmentalists were complaining about, you know, what do you do with this stuff when you scrape it out of there? We don't want to put it in a landfill. And the reason they don't want to put it in a landfill is because when you burn coal, one of the byproducts is that it actually releases mercury out of the coal. And so this sludge contains mercury. So instead of putting it into a landfill, we're putting it into concrete in everybody's homes. And that mercury can actually come off of the concrete during the curing process. And concrete usually takes 30 to 60 days to reach, you know, a 98% cure. So this is the really important time to make sure you're not going to be around this new concrete, or better yet, just ask the supplier not to put fly ash in your concrete. And they'll do it sometimes for a fee, sometimes for free. So one of the things I'll talk about this last 10%, especially with the windows, is this is where we also bring into the discussion of the feeling of bringing the outdoors into the home. The trend has been for the last 20 years now for people to have that sort of that feeling of the outdoors inside of the home through the use of more natural air, more natural light, the colors of the home to be more, not necessarily green per se, but more colors of nature. And we want to evoke those feelings of being outside. So we see, again, fresh air intakes on your HVAC systems, natural light, the use of more windows, calming colors, and design and placement of how we actually design and place our homes on the property, and how we design and place furniture and spaces within the home. Several years ago, I got involved in a project that the homeowners were incorporating what's called Stapatya Veda architecture. So everybody's familiar with what yoga is, and yoga is essentially an Ayurvedic principle of movement, and it's medicinal and so forth. Stapatya Veda is an Ayurvedic principle of design and construction, and within the rules of how do you build a home according to Vedic principles, one of the rules I learned years ago just stuck with me. And that rule was that every corner of every room should bring you bliss. And I've always remembered that, because I believe that building a healthy home is not only building a home that's utilizing healthy materials, but also makes you feel good. I want you to wake up every single day and look at this house, whatever you use, and absolutely love it, because that's something that feels good. It's a healthy home attribute. All right. Now, don't forget about moisture control. I talked about a little bit about this with the wall assembly. Waterproofing of your basement. Waterproofing around penetrations on the roof, the excuse me, air barriers and sheathing. Very important in the construction of your home to make sure you don't get moisture coming into the home. I'd point more specific things out about this. So many things to talk about, and I have to really gear it towards the individual customer, individual client, that whatever's going to work the best for them. Landscaping and drainage, huge issue to deal with. So often art in a home because of what's happening outside of the home. And then your HVAC system. Folks, do not skimp on the HVAC system. I believe that every home could use a dehumidification system, especially in the first few years. First few years that a home is built, you'll have 200 to 400 gallons of water in the air just from the curing process of the paints, the concrete, drywall mud. You got to get that moisture out. Pardon me. All right. Mold is probably the biggest thing that we're dealing with now all around the country. The first 25 years of my career, I heard really nothing about mold. I heard everything about chemical sensitivity, chemical emissions. In the last 5 years, mold has been the driving factor. Probably 7 out of 10 people today call and want to talk about how to remediate, mitigate, or build to avoid mold. Now, mold is naturally found outside. We know this. Indoor mold is problematic. All right, so we want to avoid indoor mold proliferation and growth. And we do that by eliminating the reasons you have mold. Mold comes because of moisture, heat, and a food source. If we can eliminate 1 or 2 of those 3, you'll eliminate the possibility of mold. All right. So we want to make sure we spend an awful lot of time with every client talking about this. The biggest issue we have right now that I see is a chronic inflammation response. There has been, and I know I talked about multiple chemical sensitivity before and how you become chemically sensitive. In the last 5-6 years, we have learned an awful lot about mold, and specifically about the HLA-DR gene that some people carry. About 25% of the country, of the population of the country, carries this genetic marker, meaning that you're more susceptible to problems that occur because of mold exposure. This is also where research is going in finding that MCS, chemical sensitivity, is not really the standalone disease that we all thought it was maybe 20 years ago, but that chemical sensitivity is actually a symptom of chronic inflammation response. It's also a symptom of Lyme's disease, or a symptom of mast cell activation. So because of the fact that we're doing more research on this particular genetic marker, we're finding that, what does that lead to? And it's leading to all the same people who were deemed to be chemically sensitive before are actually found to have one of those other underlying conditions. All right, folks, that is it. I am going to stop the share here. And if you have any questions, any comments, now's the time.
Hey, Andy, thank you so much for that very thorough presentation. It was really informative and has me thinking about my whole house. So maybe you'll get a call from me soon. So so we're going to begin the Q&A as you suggested, and I just want to go over a few things for the audience. We don't take questions directly from the chat. We just ask everybody raise their hand from in Zoom. If you're not familiar with how to do that, you need to go to the bottom of the Zoom, second from the right. There's a reactions button. You'll click on that, and then you'll click raise hand. When I select on you, please state where you're from, and I'll ask you to ask your question. And then we just ask that everybody keep their questions brief and on topic. And with that, let me start off with a question here. What are the most important things in order of importance for us to focus on to create a healthy home?
Well, I honestly believe that those that list that I came up with, the 90% of the toxicity comes from those 4 items. You have to remember that when you come in contact with chemicals, whether it's in the air, something that you're wearing, something that you're eating, the detrimental effects that it has within the body, sometimes we don't know where that source is, but we can pretty much say that inside of the home, these are the areas that are causing the biggest concern. Now, with that, the most important thing to concentrate within the home is the bedroom or bedrooms. Bedrooms need to be the healthy sanctuary in the room. We're inundated with chemical exposure throughout our days at places of work, where we go to school, wherever we go, in our cars, wherever. Bedroom has got to be the place where we hope to get 6 to 8 hours a night of restorative sleep. We can't get that restorative sleep if we're being inundated with chemical exposure, electromagnetic field exposure. We didn't even talk about that, mold exposure, and so forth. If you had a limited budget and you can only work on one room at a time, work on the bedroom first.
What about mattresses and box springs?
Yep. Mattresses, box springs, your bedding materials, anything that you come in contact with throughout the night. Definitely look for an organic, synthetic chemical-free mattress. There's some great options out there. There's a company called Migraine Mattress I absolutely love. I sleep on one of their mattresses myself. There's a brand called Savvy Rest that makes all natural latex mattresses. And again, it's not just the fact that they're using latex or organic materials, but it's at every part of the process. Even the fabric covers are free of pesticides, free of flame retardants. We want to get rid of all of that so that, again, your body is not competing with that throughout the night.
All right. And now this is not an environmental question, but are those mattresses comfortable?
Great question. Yes, they are comfortable. I am a believer. So I had shoulder replacement surgery about 3 years ago. And prior to that, I had another shoulder surgery. So for 5 years, I've been in absolute shoulder pain. And I bought a migraine mattress and absolutely fell in love with it myself, to the point where, this is what I sleep on today. I wanted to try it out before we actually recommend it to our customers. They are comfortable. You can, get a lot of these mattresses that are customizable. Savvy Rest allows you to customize the mattress based upon firmness. And I think that's also important for a lot of folks. So yes, extremely comfortable.
Great. And what about indoor gas ranges giving off dangerous fumes that are bad for health? Is that an issue?
Thank you to whoever asked that question, because this question has come up quite a bit in the last few months, when all of a sudden we are told that municipalities and governments want to start limiting the use of gas. Here's the story on gas appliances, especially ranges. When the gas range is installed, you want to make sure that obviously there are no leaks in the gas line. There's no leaks with the range itself. The better range you buy, the better the actual burners are. So if you're spending money on a really high quality range, you're going to get steel burners. You're going to get burners that if it's in use and it blows out for any reason, it won't continue to siphon gas out. It'll just stop and you have to relight it. That's one thing, because you want to eliminate the gas leaks. The other thing is, I think that the majority of people who have range hoods in their kitchen, they either don't use them at all or they don't know how to use them. The proper way to use a range hood in the kitchen is, when you go into your kitchen to start preparing your meal, I want you to turn on the range hood now, before you mix your ingredients, before you even turn on the range itself. This starts to create a current, okay? And you want to start that current early. So when you put a pot on the stove, all the fumes from what you're burning, all right, and what is exhausting from the gas is going out the range. All too often, people don't do this. They'll turn the range hood on only when they see smoke, and that by that time, it's too late. So if we look at all the studies that have been done on the dangers of gas stoves in the house, you'll notice that none of them actually pay any attention to the use of a range hood, or even if those families even had one. If they would monitor the range hood, if they would actually monitor the gas lines to make sure there are no leaks, and that's an easy test that can be done on a regular basis with a handheld meter, then there are no problems.
And you mentioned that that the municipalities want to get rid of gas stoves. What reason do they want to do that for?
Well, they're doing it because of environmental concerns. They're doing it because of the whole push towards electrify everything. And I'm against this, of course. First of all, I'm for people having the choice. If you want to use gas, use gas. You want to use electric, I don't care. But so many of my clients are electromagnetically sensitive that adding more electrical components in their home is just as dangerous to them as, lighting a match would be to somebody else. I have a client in California that when I first learned about induction countertops or induction cooktops years ago, he called me and he said, yeah, a friend of mine got this new form of cooktop. It's induction. It uses magnets and electricity. He said, I can't even walk into his house because he's so sensitive. He starts feeling it in himself. And if you touch the handle of a pan that's on an induction top, you become part of the circuit. So that electrical wave starts to go through you. So if you're somebody who is sensitive to electromagnetic fields, if you're somebody who has a pacemaker, you're somebody who is going through cancer treatments and you have no immune system, the use of electric cooktops like an induction cooktop would be severely harmful to you.
Great, thank you. And what do you recommend for safe insect control inside the home for ants, cockroaches, and any kind of insects that people would normally run into?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know companies are starting to come up with their own formulations of things. I usually go back to two ingredients, borax and diatomaceous earth. I think the combination of those two, just in a dust form in the corners of the rooms or blown in underneath the baseboards, are very helpful because it actually will essentially dry out the insect and it'll terminate their life.
Great, thank you. And all right, the next question is going to come from David. Where are you from, and what's your question?
Yeah, I'm David from the Washington, D.C. area. Thank you again, Andrew, for appearing. I appreciate it. I wanted to ask you, Andrew, about, first of all, countertops, granite, quartz, and recycled glass. I was hoping you could give a comparison of the three or other countertops. Isn't it true that granite is radioactive? I heard that to some degree. And secondly, if you're chemically sensitive, would you discourage people from buying a brand new home? You want to wait until it off gases and settle because it could be problematic for someone who's chemically sensitive?
Wow, David, great questions. Thank you. First off, with countertops, I don't like natural stone countertops, not because of the radioactivity nature of them. I'll get to that in a second. I don't like natural stone countertops because in order to keep them from staining, you have to seal them on a regular basis, sometimes every 6 to 12 months. The sealers that are made to seal up granite countertops or quartzite countertops are all fairly toxic materials. So imagine every 6 months, you're coating these countertops with a toxic material just to keep them looking good. Now, if you don't care about that, if you don't care if they stain or if they have water absorption leading to cracking, then that's fine. Then go ahead and install them. I don't have any problem with that from a health standpoint themselves. It's those sealers that are problematic. Now, to the radioactivity issue, several years ago, a study came out saying that a small percentage of granite slabs can contain radioactive material, and that we need to test all of our countertops because of this. Come to find out that study was actually paid for by another manufacturer of quartz countertops. And so I kind of take that research with a grain of salt. I think that, is it possible? Of course, it's possible because these stones are extracted from the earth, but not very probable at all. And again, I kind of look at that, follow the money trail, and it followed all the way to one of their biggest competitors. And so I think that is a very fair trial. Regarding a new home, if you're chemically sensitive, I think it's possible to build a new home. Matter of fact, I have loads of examples of clients that I've worked with over the years who moved into a brand new home completely built for them, and they're thriving in those homes. So it's very possible. It happens every day now. Does it happen for the average person? No, I think if you have chemical sensitivity, there's always fear in moving into a new home because of fear of the unknown. You don't know what's going to hurt you because you don't really know what's been used to make that house. There's about 1,000 different things that go into building a house. And I've had clients over the years that have been so sensitive, we've had to have them test every component that goes into their house, all the way down to the screws and nails that hold it together, to make sure they can tolerate that before we built their house. So if you were to buy a home that you worked with an average builder and it's a nice house, well made, I would say there'd probably be a problem inside of that house. And how long would it take for you to be able to live there? It could be months, it could be years, it could be never. Everybody's tolerance is different. And that's why I like to get involved with the home construction from the start at the design phase to make sure that everything that's chosen is something that you will be able to tolerate.
Great, thank you. And can you talk about radon? Dangers of radon radiation, how we should handle it, how dangerous it is?
Yeah, I mean, radon is the one of the leading causes of lung cancer in this country, and radon's and here we go. It's another one of those natural things that comes out of the ground. Radon is a gas. It's colorless, odorless gas, and it emanates typically from homes that are either built with a basement or built with a slab on grade. Crawl space homes are typically a little less susceptible because the living space is not attached to the concrete. But I think that every home should be tested for radon, and if it's over what deemed to be acceptable levels, there are ways to mitigate through ventilation systems, through certain types of coatings or sealers that mitigate. I think every new home that's built today, especially if you're building your home in an area that's known to have a radon problem, build the home with all the equipment already installed or all the piping already installed to install a radon mitigation system if you need one. To install the piping you need at the time of building maybe costs a few $100s. And then you hook it up to a pump system afterwards. To do it in an existing home will now cost you several $1,000s. So do it while you can.
Great. And what are your thoughts on the use of natural and non-toxic cleaning products, and how can homeowners make the switch to healthier cleaning products?
Awesome question. That's again part of that last 10%, I believe. I think cleaning products is one of those things that can kind of make or break your healthy home project. And let's say you just spent your life savings and built yourself a beautiful, healthy home, and then you hire a cleaning crew to get it all ready for you to move in, and they use all of these noxious cleaning compounds to make it look good, but you're essentially ruining this beautiful, healthy palette you put together. It makes a big difference. And so the good thing is there's a lot of companies out now that make some really nice products, very easy to use, very, very safe products. I mean, again, working with companies like AFM, Branch Basics makes some wonderful products. I mean, even small companies, small regional companies. A company I just worked with recently called Tees Organics makes these wonderful organic, natural cleaning materials. Matter of fact, you can make it yourself at home just using things like vinegar and borax and so forth. Even a little bit of essential oil, and it's very easy to do and very effective.
Great. And how do they work? A lot of times, I think people get these real natural cleaning products, and they feel like it doesn't work as well as the more toxic varieties.
Yeah, and then that's a really good point. And that's the reason why those toxic products work so well is because of what they do. And I'll take as an example something like Fantastic or 409. When you spray that onto a stain on a surface, it actually just eats away at the stain. The chemicals will actually erode the stain so you can wipe it away. Not very safe, but very effective, right? Then you take other materials, something like the AFM multi-purpose cleaner or the Branch Basics cleaner. It doesn't eat away at the surface, but it's what's called a surfactant. It penetrates in and actually just debonds the stain and lifts it away from the surface. And it does that using very, very safe materials. Now, in that action, sometimes you got to do it twice, because what you don't want to do is use a material that is eating away at the surface, because that's also probably eating away at your skin and your nasal passages and the surface itself. And you'll eventually start to dull the surface. So yeah, some of these natural materials or safer materials don't work as well as the chemically laden products. I'll guarantee that. But you'd be surprised. A lot of them are almost as good or just as good, and they are getting better. Technology in all these materials is really all the research and technology is being pushed towards the safer alternatives, because that's what the market is demanding. So I think that it can only get better from here.
Great. Our next question is coming from Arlene. Where are you from, and what is the question, Arlene?
Well, hi, I'm from Canada, BC, and I've got two questions. One for you, Michael. I missed the first part of this interview. Is there a way that I can access a replay?
Yeah, I guess that question is for me. Yes, if you go to the website, therealtruthabout.health.com, you will, under videos, you'll find all the replays, but you will need to wait for it tomorrow because we need to process them first. And then you'll be able to find all the videos from all of the lectures, including this one with Andy.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. For Andy, I'm in Canada, as I said, and I wonder if you know about the Essentia organic latex mattress.
I do not. I think that there are a lot of good companies that have started up in the last few years, and this sounds like it could be one of them.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
Okay. And our next question is coming from Stacy. Where are you from, and what is your question?
Hello. I'm so sorry. This was already answered and you just talked about mattresses. Anyways, I'm from Indiana. And are there specific things that we should be looking for, like Green Guard certified or like GOTS or something like that, like certifications when it comes to picking out mattresses? Like, it's very timely because my mom was just asking me, and we have a bamboo one, but I feel like even since we've bought one, the technology has gotten even better. So I'm sorry if you went over this, but are there a few things to look for mattresses?
No, that's a great question. And actually we talked about mattresses, but this kind of gets more into detail, and this is good. Those certifications that you talk about, like Green Guard Gold and GOTS and GALS and some others, OTEX that are out there, these are certifications that have been developing over the last few years to almost the last 10 years. So if you bought a mattress that was a very healthy, safe, natural mattress 10 years ago, none of these things really existed at the time. And so what I'm looking for is, first of all, I'm always looking for mattresses that are certified organic, in the materials that they use. GOTS, GOTS, GALS, GOLS. These are certifications that have to do with things like the latex that's used or the fabrics used itself. Green Guard Gold is an independent test for the entire material, for the entire mattress itself. It doesn't test individual things. And matter of fact, the GOTS and GALS certification has nothing to do with off-gas. It has to do with whether or not the ingredients are derived organically in an organic manner. But Green Guard Gold certification is about the off-gassing predominantly of formaldehyde. And so, yes, if you find a mattress that is Green Guard Gold certified, that tells you that a mattress releases less than 7 parts per billion of formaldehyde. So that's an absolutely great start. So I would look at things like that. Of course, I always tell people to get recommendations from family and friends, and especially, places like this where you can get to interact with so many knowledgeable people. There's a lot of information out there. Unfortunately, a lot of information that is somewhat misleading and erroneous. We talked about that a little earlier. We talked about greenwashing. But yeah, those certifications you talked about, they're definitely a great start.
Okay, great. And I know you hit on this in your lecture, so this might be a little bit of a repeat, but what do you recommend for painting walls and staining floors to avoid exposure to dangerous chemicals?
Yeah, so we did touch on this a bit, but let's talk about painting walls. The biggest thing right now in the paint industry is that every paint manufacturer is talking about their zero VOC paints, and all these paints are being marketed as being eco-friendly and green. And again, I talked about this. they're eco-friendly and green because they don't contain volatile organic compounds that are regulated by the EPA to be creating low-level smog and ozone. It has nothing to do with the health of the occupants. All right. And so there's also a lot of misinformation out there about what happens with paint when it cures. The average paint cures in about 7 to 10 days. The curing process is essentially where the moisture or water or solvent evaporates and it creates the film on the surface. That's the curing process. When the curing process stops, this is when off-gassing begins. Off-gassing, by definition, is the release of unreacted chemical monomers after a full cure. So this is like dust poking off of a surface. A lot of people think that off-gassing is like steam coming off a bowl of hot water. It's not the case. That's a head of pressure. That's something different. Off-gassing is just the release of dust particles of chemical that come off of the surface, and they can come off in some instances for 30, 40 years. So I think that you got to be a little bit more mindful of the materials that you use. I don't buy materials solely on whether or not they are low or zero VOC. I buy them based upon do they use any toxic or hazardous ingredients? That's the bigger issue for me, because a gallon of paint can be made using 100 different chemicals, right? You look at the back side of the label and it's going to list maybe 3 or 4. Well, they only list those 3 or 4 because by law, they have to list those. The other things that are in there, the other things that aren't listed on the safety data sheet are things such as elements that make up either less than 1% of the volume or are part of what's called a proprietary blend. This is where manufacturers are able to hide ingredients like formaldehyde precursors, formaldehyde donors. Formaldehyde precursors are chemicals that in a gallon of paint, in a liquid gallon of paint, it is completely inert. You can't even measure it. But as the paint starts to cure on the wall, those chemicals combine, it creates formaldehyde during the curing process, and then it begins to release as off-gassing. And that can happen for years afterwards. So you got to look for manufacturers who are really transparent with their ingredients and transparent about the verbiage that they use on how they sell you the products. And the same thing goes true with floor coatings. The exact same conversation can be had with those floor coating manufacturers.
Right. And how do you approach the issue of water quality, and what steps can homeowners take to ensure that their drinking water is clean and healthy?
Yeah, this is a problem all over the country. First, you have to obviously determine, is it municipal water? Is it well water? In every consult that I do for a new home, inevitably we talk about water, and they want to know what purification system to put in. I really don't recommend a purification system until we know what we're dealing with. And so that requires water testing. If you are on municipal water, chances are you can go to the municipal website and they will have the most current water report at the ready. And they'll tell you exactly what's in the water. And of course, because of situations that they're still dealing with in Flint and other parts of the country, municipalities, especially the ones who have good water sources, want to tell you this. All right. And so you want to download that water report. If you're on well water, then you actually have to take a sample and have it tested by an independent lab, looking for the exact same things, looking for heavy metals, pathogens, carcinogens, and so forth. And then from that point, we can recommend the best water purification system based on what we see.
Great. All right. Our next question is coming from Gail. Gail, where are you from, and what's your question?
Hi, I'm from Boise, Idaho. And just want to say it's a great presentation. It was better than I expected. So thank you for that. But I was just curious, you mentioned wood window frames that it's required that they be treated with pesticides in this country. Mm-hmm. I just wondered about when that started. What about old window frames that are like 30 years or older? And is that a newer thing, requirement, or are they all that way?
Yeah, when I got into the business in the early 90s, I think I heard of that requirement by around the year 2000 is when manufacturers started talking to me about, because I was working with a couple of wood window companies at the time, and asking them about the finishes that they use and so forth. And in that research, we found that, well, the wood's going to have this pesticide and it has to be there. We have no choice to use it. And so I want to say it was probably in the early 2000s that this became more prevalent.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate
You're
it.
welcome.
And Becca, where are you from and what's your question? Oops, hold on a second here. There we go. Becca, where are you from?
All right. There you go. Thank you. Yes, Becca, and I'm in Los Angeles, California, originally from Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Hey.
So there was a question about the purification. I was going to ask about the whole home water filtration system. So thank you for answering that. I don't know if there's any particular ones that you recommend, and then also about air filters within the home and just the air quality. Like, are there certain types of filters that are better than other, or particles per, I don't know how it goes, particles per million or something like that. So thank you very much.
Sure. Well, I'm going to take that second question because I barely touched on it before, and it really is very important. Whole house air purification is extremely important. First of all, you have to determine what type of HVAC system you have, if it's a air handling system, if it's a radiant system, so forth. Let's say, for instance, it's a whole house air handling system utilizing a furnace, a blower with an AC unit. This is typical in 85% of homes. In order to purify the air in every room, there's two ways to do it. One is to buy portable air purifiers and put them in every single room. A portable air purifier is something that it may be rated to clean up to 1,500 or up to 2,000 square feet. But let's face it, if you have an air purifier in one bedroom, the air in a bedroom all the way across the house is never going to travel over there to get through that purifier. So that rating is based upon theoretical, in a laboratory in one giant 2,000 square foot room with the unit right in the middle. All right. In your home, it's never going to happen. So either you have to put in individual purifiers or you do a whole house purification system. I work with one I have for many years called a Solace Air RS4. And with this system, and there are many other good systems in the market, so I'm not just shilling for that one. You want to be able to do all three forms of purification at the same time. The first form is particle capture, or what we know is like a HEPA filter, right? Air goes through the filter. It's rated at a certain MERV level, and particle size. Certain particle sizes get captured in the filter, and then the rest of the air goes through. The problem with this is if you have a MERV that's too high, air doesn't go through it properly, and it actually reduces the heating and cooling of your house. So you got to be very careful about how you balance that. The second thing is you can do what's called a UV light. And a UV light that's inside of an air purification system will take care of your pathogens, your mold spores, your viruses, bacteria that flows through the air. The third way to purify is using carbon. And that's like, the Austin air purifiers and, others that use high amounts of carbon. They're portables. RS4 uses a carbon filter in their system too. So you have all three methods. And that third method of carbon, that's what absorbs chemicals, gases, VOCs. So all the air in the house will go through eventually through this purifier, but you have to make sure you have return air ducts that service every room. If you have a house that has one return air grill in one hallway, you're kind of in that situation I talked about before with the portables, where you're not going to get air from the far expanses of the house really going through there to purify each and every corner.
Great, Andy. Thank you so much. We're out of time. You really made environmental, concerns a fun topic. And now I'm looking suspiciously at everything in my living space. Thank you for that. So, if we can unmute the audience, please.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Wonderful.